Good morning, everyone. I had to write down to say my name because I would forget it otherwise. I'm Jovonne Bickerstaff. I'm the Senior Program Officer for Higher Education Initiatives at ACLS, and I'm so happy to be here with all of you this morning and to be here with our wonderful panelists for this conversation on HBCUs, legacy, and future. And so I'm gonna offer a really brief introduction of all our panelists so that we can spend the majority of our time in our conversation, and all of their extensive bios are on the website so you can learn more. So I'm going to start with Dave. Dave Canton is an associate professor of history at the University of Florida and director of its African American Studies program. Melanie Price is endowed professor of political science at Prairie View A&M University, and the inaugural director of the Ruth J. Simmons Center for Race and Justice. Jelani Favors is the Henry E. Fry Endowed Professor at North Carolina A&T and the director of the Center of Excellence for Social Justice, and given our conversation today, the author of the national award-winning book, Shelter in a Time of Storm: How Black Colleges Fostered Generations of Leadership and Activism. And finally, Eileen Kane, who helped bring us all together, is a historian of modern Europe at Connecticut College. And so we're gonna kick things off with having Eileen explain for us how we all came to meet.
Thanks, Jovonne. Can everyone hear me? Great. So I'm a historian of Russia, and I teach European history at Connecticut College. And how did this crew come together? Well, Dave and I are co-directors, co-PIs on a project called the HBCU Fellowship Project, and that came from basically two sources, I would say. So one is, Dave and I were colleagues for 13 years, I think it was, at Connecticut College in the history department, and Dave was a great colleague because he would answer my questions about African American history when I would ask them, and then he would tell me what books to read. And so we developed this intellectual relationship, and then I had an experience, an eye-opening experience on a panel as a judge for a major fellowship, where we had one applicant from an HBCU, and that applicant was very quickly eliminated because the application didn't look right. That was kind of the bottom line. So I went to Dave, we started talking, we fortunately, we pitched it to the idea that we were developing to the MacArthur Foundation. They funded it. We're now on our second grant. We went to President Ruth Simmons, who helped us refine our ideas. And the idea that we started with was to figure out, find the barriers that block the flow of research resources to humanities and social science scholars at HBCUs, and then design initiatives to remove those blockages. So we had our first convening at Prairie View. This is where we all met for the first time. Jovonne and Joy were both there, and we discovered to our delight that they were already well ahead of us in this work, so we've been collaborating very productively since then. I have to give a shout out to John Paul Christie too, who has helped me so much in thinking about fellowships and also workshops to get people together to write fellowship applications. So the idea was time. How do you get these colleagues of ours who have work that they want to get out there time? And time, of course, is money, is fellowships. I wanted to say one last thing, which is that when I started to do this, this work, I sort of thought of it as, what can I do to help or to assist my colleagues at HBCUs? And I've really started to think about it much more. Ta-Nehisi Coates talks about racism as plunder that takes many forms. And so I really think about this work that we're doing, and we hope more people get involved in this work, as returning what has been plundered. So with that, I will look forward to hearing from my colleagues.
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, so Eileen, I think she called, it was the fall of 2021 with this idea. And when Eileen gets an idea, she gets hyper passionate. No doubt emails, the phone calls, the text, and then my role was to reach out to 10 colleagues, HBCUs. I reached out to senior colleagues like Jelani and Melanie, we go back to Wesleyan and Connecticut College, 2003, 2004, and that these were seasoned scholars.
Also Ohio State grad.
That's right, Ohio State, right? And so reached out to these 10 scholars from Morehouse, Spelman, Alabama State, so public and private universities, because HBCUs are all not the same, and we made sure that we had scholars who were producing, who were academic, also admin, who had experiences at HBCUs, who published, so they were familiar with publishing. So it was intentional who we selected for the Prairie View Symposium last October, and definitely picking Ruth Simmons and Prairie View A&M, because Melanie was there, was another reason why we selected the university, because we knew how much influence Ruth Simmons have in higher education for this to work. And in fact, we are gonna have a grant writing workshop in August at Morehouse College for that new ACLS HBCU Fellowship Grant. So again, we know that we're meeting August 2nd through the 4th. The same group of scholars will have discussions on the workshops, research, scholarship, but like we said before, it's about getting time. I'm a Morehouse College graduate, and we see the impact that HBCUs have on American higher education in spite of the lower endowments, the heavy teaching loads, but we all agree that there's great scholarship at these HBCUs, but these folks need the time to publish, get the word out, give lectures at your organizations, at your universities, another way to share this knowledge.
So you just perfectly set me up, Dave, for thinking about HBCU's legacy, right? And when we think about the roles that HBCUs have played in American history and politics, they've not only accelerated that social and political change, in many ways they've provided the blueprint for effective organizing and cultivating knowledge and relationships. Dave, in an interview you mentioned whether it's during Reconstruction or during the Civil Rights Movement, Black folks have been at the center of making America a true democracy, a multiracial democracy. And part of that, it seems, thinking about Jelani's work as well, has been facilitated by what Jelani calls the second curriculum. So Jelani, could you kick us off by talking a bit about that?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. A little HBCU tradition right there. call and response. First of all, I want to thank Joy, Mary, Jovonne for inviting us to be a part of this conversation. I want to begin with the idea, which really isn't controversial at all, and that is that white supremacy is an idea, and it was born in the academy. And that's something that we have to acknowledge and understand. And for years, Black folks were studied as inferior. For years, Black folks were studied as abnormal, as uneducable. And these ideas were promoted in every academic field represented within this room. It was promoted and it was embraced. And I think it's also very appropriate that we were asked to have this conversation in Philadelphia, where 186 years ago, a new model came forth in the Institute for Colored Youth. Not far from here, what will become Cheney State University offered a new blueprint, as you mentioned, Jovonne, a new way of thinking, a new way of moving within the academic space. And it's within that space that it wasn't simply about studying Latin and Greek and history and biology, but Black educators very purposefully and very deliberately countered these ideas of white supremacy with what I refer to in my work as the second curriculum. Now, what is the second curriculum? It's composed of what I argue are three major components that we began to see being propped up at every Black college that begins to evolve, beginning the antebellum era and then moving forward into the post-Reconstruction era. That is an idea and a pedagogy composed of three major principles. One is race consciousness, right? Countering the destructive effects of white supremacy. Teaching young Black children, opening up those doors, viewing these young Black children not as inferior, not as Sambos and pickaninnies, but as people who have identity, folks who are indeed human, folks who deserve to be poured into and supported. This is what Black colleges provided. So race consciousness is the first element of that second curriculum. The second element is cultural nationalism. The notion and idea that Black spaces matter. Promoting and elevating black churches, black organizations, black businesses, that's something that becomes dominant within the curriculum. It produces what many of you probably are familiar with this terminology, race men and race women, who very much embrace racial responsibility and the necessity of using their intellectual talents given to them, provided to them at HBCUs, to go out to construct and build black spaces where black folks could be free, where black folks could thrive. And then the third component is idealism. One of the concepts that popped up over and over again in my study and my research were black students being constantly drilled in the ideas of democracy and citizenship. Constantly drilled in those ideas, which again always struck me as strange because those were two concepts and ideas that black folks were denied on a consistent basis, on a daily basis. But yet here within these spaces, such as the Institute for Colored Youth, they're being taught the importance of using their intellectual talents to finally make America be a democratic space. To be a space where they recognize that citizenship of all people. And so HBCUs provide this very radical counter narrative, counter example of what higher education can be. And in doing so, they end up birthing social movements to ultimately deconstruct white supremacy and Jim Crow wherever they find it.
So one of the things you just said, Jelani, was that black spaces matter.
Absolutely.
And in that, HBCUs matter. Recognizing all that HBCUs have been able to contribute, they've done that very often despite systemic and arguably intentional underfunding for a number of the public institutions, the land grants. What we know, a Forbes article came out in 2021 that they've been underfunded to the tune of somewhere around $12.8 billion. Mm-hmm. So to give us an idea of that, for a place like Tennessee State University, that's between $500 million and, depending on calculations, $1.9 billion they've been underfunded for. At NCA&T, $2.8 billion. Yeah. And so, in many ways, HBCUs have had this outsized impact, have overperformed, given the sustained underinvestment, where if you add up all of their endowments, all 100 or so HBCUs, it doesn't even total $4 billion, yep. Right? And they've experienced some of the steepest declines in federal funding, shout out to Melanie for the research, between 2003 and 2015. And so how do we understand the consequences of that underinvestment that has happened for HBCUs and the way that it has impacted what they're able to do? That's for all of you.
So
the thing that I'll say about that, so Prairie View is also on that list. I should say the thing that's also interesting for me and Jelani is that we have been sort of co-conspirators because we both returned to our alma maters after a long stint away to do this social justice work, which I don't think either one of us actually saw coming, but for various reasons. And one of them is underfunding. Mm-hmm. Right? That is, people have to imagine that they're going to retire at some point and you need to be earning money. I don't know if y'all care about that, but I actually, right? They have to be earning money, and that is underfunding means that the faculty are often underpaid, they're often overworked, but also it's a matter of the fact that they also get the most vulnerable students. Mm-hmm. And so I use Prairie View as an example. We're over 60% first generation college student and over 60% Pell Grant eligible, which means that the vast majority of our students, no one expects to go to college in the first place, right. And they certainly don't expect them to graduate. We also then are hindered by the fact that because we have these vulnerable students, which we have a high dropout rate, that means we also have a high non-payment of student loans, which means the federal government further punishes us because our alumni don't pay their student loans back. Right? Then, we can talk about this later, but all of these schools exist for the most part in states where the state government is super intrusive into the education process. But they're only intrusive in those universities that they feel need the most management, mm-hmm. and that's always going to be HBCUs. Mm-hmm. And so what that means is you end up with people who are doing the yeoman's work of graduating black students. So black colleges don't graduate the majority of black students, but they only make up less than 10% of all colleges in the country. Right. And they graduate 30% of black graduates.
Overperforming.
Oh, is that surprising?
Overperforming.
They make up less than 10% of all colleges in the country, and they graduate 30% of all the graduates. That's 50% of all the judges, black judges, 50% of all the black doctors, right? And so if you have ever seen a black doctor or a black judge, there's a strong chance that they came from one of these schools. And they're also in many of these schools doing lots of remedial work to get people up to the point of being able to do college, which means our graduation rate is longer, which is another thing that we get punished for by the state. And so part of the thing that people don't understand is that you're then asking that person who is teaching 3 to 5 classes a semester, who is dealing with hundreds of students, who is worrying about things like food security for their students, who's worried about things like housing security for their students, to take time out of that schedule to apply for a very extensive grant, right? Or to understand that we don't necessarily at all of these colleges get money to go to conferences, which means if you see a person from a historically black college at a conference, there's a very good chance that they have funded a lot of that out of their own pocket. They won't be reimbursed. And so there are lots of these kinds of structural barriers that make it more difficult, but the narrative becomes they don't participate. We can't get them to participate. All of these things become sort of a cyclical kind of problem that leads to what I see often at conferences as the disappearance of HBCU scholars from the kinds of spaces that you are trying to create. Is that enough? Can I'm gonna stop there.
No, I wanted to very quickly underscore that point. A PBS study was just released, I believe like last month, highlighting the fact that there are only 7% of black folks are educators in this country. 50% of them attended HBCUs. 50% out of 7% total black educators. 50%, and not only that, but the study suggested that students perform better in their classes. Right. So you have to ask the question: what are these students who attend HBCUs being exposed to that makes them better educators, right? That pulls out and sees the humanity within their students and pulls out that humanity and pours within them a sense of being and a sense of belonging and a sense of accomplishment.
Meanwhile, I should say that these students, these students are also at the forefront of youth voting rights struggles. They are also the ones who are being, whose votes are being suppressed left and right among youth. They are also the ones who are standing in lines. They are also the ones who are doing lots of the kinds of youth activism that we see. They're also involved in that as well. And so it's a very rich environment for them to be a part of, but they understand, have no doubt, the constraints with which they live, right? I took some students to Boston for a conference, and we went to Harvard, and they saw the museum on campus where you have like Kehinde Wiley and Picasso and all of that, and they are like, this is a campus? This is at the campus? And they understand the difference between those things, which means we also have to do a lot of work for our students saying, don't let that difference convince you that you're not smart enough to be there, right? So you're doing a lot of work to make up for things that money doesn't solve everything, but we know in higher education it solves a ton.
It solves some things though.
A ton of things.
Right?
Right.
And Dave, I know you wanted to chime in. I just wanted to underline something that Melanie pointed out in that comparison about what students were able to see at Harvard. The underfunding also has led to deferred maintenance and an inability to invest in campus development, and how that plays out in both how students see themselves, but also what faculty are able to do in your ability to attract and retain those. All of these things, that systemic underfunding has numerous impacts.
Right. Well, I like the point, if you look at most graduate schools, half the students are HBCU graduates. So I went to Ohio State, you go to Michigan, you have a black graduate student function, Morehouse, Prairie View, A&T, half of the students HBCU graduates. As a Morehouse College graduate, I think with HBCUs, they instill confidence. I was a first generation student from the Bronx. My parents didn't go to college. I get to Morehouse College where I had my first black male teacher. So a lot of that is huge mentoring role models that HBCUs provide. So again, like we said, overperforming historically. And just imagine if you had even half of the funding that was denied over all these years, that this is the work that HBCUs do and continue to do in spite of the lack of funding, in spite of people still throwing a side eye HBCUs academics rigor and these type of questions, right? So the data is there. So how do we in this group, how do we get the data out there to people about HBCUs, the accurate data, that they are doing a great job? Only time we see with HBCUs either some sort of tragedy, you know, like I'm a big ESPN fan. If there's some fight at HBCU game, then we're on ESPN. There's some sort of scandal, then we're in the Chronicle of Higher Education. But all the real work doesn't get the information out there to people about what HBCUs are doing.
So thinking about that, right, thinking about what the narrative is and what we understand about HBCUs, in an Elle article, Melanie, you highlighted that HBCUs remind us all that Black ingenuity is more resilient than white supremacy. Nice. And so it was nice, you did well, right? And so one thing I want you all to kind of share with us is what can we learn from the innovation and dedication that has enabled HBCUs to have this reach, to have this impact, particularly thinking about teaching and mentorship, because HBCUs are teaching intensive places and they are renowned, right, for their faculty commitment to students and their holistic development. You all are at the vanguard, you're the vanguard of teaching and mentorship. And so how do we understand what you've been able to do?
So one of the things that I tell my students anytime I get in front of a group of students on our campus, and it's a thing that was lost on me when I was young as a student there, but I try to get them to see it more, is that Prairie View sits on the grounds of a former plantation. It was a plantation that was purchased in 1875 to put a historically Black college there. So it wasn't like anybody was confused about what was happening in the moment. And so I tell my students that there are very few places in the world where you can stand on the same ground where people were legally barred from reading and writing and then watch their descendants become college graduates, right? And that alone suggests something about the importance of the place. But also I think I lost track of your question because I knew I wanted to say that.
Vanguard.
That's right, of teaching and mentoring. But also, here's the kinds of things, like this is just the kind of things that we have to figure out when we take students. When I took those kids to Boston, most of them are from Texas, which means they don't have coats, the same kinds of coats. So we're going to Boston in February. And rather than, when I worked at Wesleyan, when I was going places, I never asked those kids, how are you packing? Not once. It never occurred to me to ask them. But I had to ask these kids, hey, you got a winter coat? Because I know you ain't never been to Boston before in February. And so it's those kinds of things that we are doing as well. And what it does is a more humanistic approach to how we understand our students. And part of it is because we sat in those same places, but you don't have to sit in those places to actually do it. So one of my colleagues, I don't know, she didn't expect me to say this, is Jen Erdley, who is, do you mind if I say you're a white woman? Good. Very much a white woman. And she is also there with me. He was there before me, before I got there actually. And we've worked on lots of things together. And part of the thing is that everybody who comes to work at these places, they see the brilliance of the students. But if you have been exposed to other things, you also see that part of what we're doing is matching not just a gap in funding, but a gap in exposure.
Right.
And that takes a lot of time and work. And what we're also trying to do is explain to our students, you become like a sort of hope evangelist, right? I'm very cynical. You don't know me at all, but I'm very cynical in every part of my life except for teaching. Those kids can do anything. When they talk about stuff, they can do anything. Because if I didn't tell them that, there's enough signs in the world that suggest that they couldn't do it, right? And so you find yourself trying to over-convince, trying to do lots of sort of prodding, trying to figure out how, oh, this is the thing you should do. Literally, I'm trying to convince this Muslim girl right now that she should do like one of these glamour graduation shots, because that's the kind of thing that college students could do. That's not a part of my job. It's just, I know that she has lived a very conservative college life, and I'm like, do one fun thing, Asha. And I'm like looking on Amazon to find modest purple and gold, that's our school colors, scarves for her. She is not doing it. She is not listening to me. But I'm convinced that in the next 2 weeks, we meet Monday, that this thing is going to happen. And part of that is what I'm telling you about the kind of work we're doing. She's also a super smart student. So I also encourage her in that stuff. But we're also doing a lot of this other work. And then you say, can you fill out this 40-page fellowship application?
To write this grant.
To write this grant. And it's not, and I should say that people at these schools are producing work.
Yes.
And sometimes what's most sad about it is they have the work, they have the data, they have all the stuff, but they don't have time to sit down and write. And if somebody at some of these organizations, at some of these institutions, just said, we're going to select 5 HBCU faculty a year, and what we're going to do is give them time to write, it totally changes the trajectory of their research life. It integrates them into these kinds of organizations in a way that they have never experienced. It gives them time to think about critical things that are important to them.
Can I really just jump on that really quickly? Again, we talk about intentionality, right? We talk about being deliberate in your work. And when you see someone like Melanie Price holding court, as she always does when she speaks, everywhere. But when you see someone like Melanie Price, she is a reflection of Jewel Prestige. Yes. Right? She is the Jewel Prestige is a reflection in many ways of Rodney Higgins. Right? There's a legacy, there's a lineage here of Black educators, race men, race women, who worked within these spaces and poured into these students because they realized if they didn't, right, what's tomorrow look like? So in the same way in which you're talking about working with your student Asha, pouring into, so that becomes a part of the HBCU legacy. Right. And it's not simply just, mentoring can happen in a variety of different spaces, but it's about the energy circulating within the HBCU spaces. I refer to it as, and I borrowed this phrase from Victor Turner, a cultural anthropologist, communitas, right? This isn't simply about brick and mortar, right? It's about the energy, the spirit, the vision, the purpose that circulates within HBCUs that, quite honestly, does not circulate in Harvard. I was a part of this documentary series with Skip Gates, and one of the other commentators mentioned that, actually it was Eddie Glaude, talked about the fact that, hey, it's no curiosity that Brown versus Board of Education doesn't happen at Harvard. It happens at Howard, right? So when you think about the legacy and the energy of these spaces and the mentors that have, for generations, have been a part of that space, that's what HBCUs do, and that's what HBCUs do well. So when we talk about, this deficit, this gap in terms of funding, right, we should also highlight the legacy of achievement that's emerged out of that, and educators who produce educators have been a part of that.
What I was going to say, I'm sorry, Jovonne, I know you have a plan, but let me quickly. So because we don't have, I'm a political scientist by training, we don't have graduate programs in the same way, and we don't have graduate students. What that means then is we now have undergraduates who are working on trying to figure out, we're doing a whole slavery study of our own, and we have undergraduates who are doing all of that work. They're working on a cemetery where enslaved people are buried. These are all 18, 19, 20-year-olds. They're getting ready to use Doppler radar. I don't know what it means, but they're gonna drive some machines over this cemetery. It's all undergraduates who are doing this work, which means our students are also getting a different kind of exposure than most students, because I search out computer science majors because I need them to help me build stuff. I have architecture students who I work with, and so it's not just students in the humanities, it's that we have to find students who have the basic skills that we need and then work with them to build up, to get us to the point to be able to produce the things that we produce with no funding.
With no funding.
Well,
Yeah.
Can I say something about grants quickly?
Go ahead.
Okay. In case it's not, I'm just listening to what you're saying, and to me, the essence, and this became clear to me at some point, and it seems so obvious once I saw it, the grants and fellowships, major grants and fellowships, and I know some people in this room probably sponsor them through their learned societies, they are designed for scholars at PWIs. That's the subtext of what you're saying. So, and the particular rhythms of teaching and research and the volume of teaching, and so most of you may know ACLS just launched this pilot fellowships and grants, you certainly know, for HBCU faculty. And one of the things that I know from talking to Joy, and it's obvious in the design, this is not your typical, here's $60,000 for a year. So let's just remember that these were designed, this is part of what you were saying about it being baked into the academy. The other thing I wanted to say was, this is just to emphasize what Shelley Lowe was saying last night about being on the ground in these places and going, because I was we had our first convening at Prairie View, and I remember sitting at the table and saying something about deans, and Melanie just cut me off. She was like, no, you're wrong, not here, that's not how it works. If If you come in here with all these assumptions, you're not going to understand. So, you know, we may think we know what it means to, you know, at PWIs to work with students, to mentor students, and you've heard some of this, you know, just in this little bit right here. It's very, very different. And so going to these places, I think, is going to be essential to thinking about what you want to do.
So I want to pick up on this thread about the assumptions that potential funders and collaborators and philanthropists might have about HBCUs and how they work. And I want you all to think about what are the assumptions about those institutional processes that you'd like them to interrogate in order to realize the visions that you all have, which I give homework. We know it is part of what we want to make sure we underline here. If you're thinking about what you would like to see happen, the ways you would like to see investment happen within HBCUs, what are the things that folks have to question and interrogate in order to make that happen?
I can start with that one. I think there's a myth that all black people are the same. So I went to Morehouse College, you know, I'm from a working class background. I go to Atlanta, you know, and realize there's a black elite in Atlanta.
Yes.
Right? You know, third generation Morehouse. I don't know what any of that stuff means, right? You know, for me, I had a West Indian background, parents, I get to Atlanta, I'm eating soul food, never had it in my life. So I think when you fund HBCUs, that within black HBCUs, there's diversity within that. So I have West Indian parent backgrounds, you got African parents backgrounds, you got, you know, a first generation, second generation, there's third generation. So you can't assume that there's one monolith, there's not one model. So I think when you do provide funding that there can be studies, what impact does it have, a third generation or second generation or first generation, what impact it has on the campus? You see, and that's why I noticed going to Morehouse, I did a little overtime, but I won't say how much. Did a little overtime, but going there, seeing the diversity within people of African descent, I think that's often the biggest mistakes. Class is real, intersectionality is real. Oscar Morris College, you have black gay men, you know, how does that impact HBCUs? So I think we have to rethink how we look at HBCUs, that black folks have never been a monolith, that within these HBCUs there is diversity that must be examined.
And so in thinking about that diversity, it's also the diversity of historically black colleges and universities. Right. They're public and private, they're small and large. They exist in a variety of regions within the US as well. And I think we would be remiss not to talk about this political climate that we're in right now and what that has meant for HBCUs given their location often in red states. Mm-hmm. Right? And so how, in this moment, are you seeing that play out?
So in the state of Texas, I mean, that should be enough, I should just say that. In the state of Texas, several things. I would like to tell you two things. One, so as a part of my center, Ruth Simmons came up with this idea that we were going to have an activist in residence, which is an innovative idea, but I mean, it's an activist in residence. Yeah. It's not like a person who's going to come and blow the whole campus up. And so she appoints me as the person to decide that, and I choose a woman who works at Black Lives Matter, which apparently did blow the campus up. I should be very clear about that. The lieutenant governor,
that's right,
state legislatures, the Texas A&M system, they're all like, you cannot do this. They're going to teach them how to defund the police. They're going to do all of this stuff. They're calling. They're like, who is in charge of this? And that was 3 years ago. And to this day, every time they go before the Appropriations Committee in the state, they ask about the Race and Justice Center and the Activist in Residence program. That's one. The other thing is the lieutenant governor, when he was running for office, said that he is going to revoke tenure for anybody who does critical race theory. It's impossible to be on my campus and not teach Black history. It's impossible.
That's
and
right.
What they're most upset about is the connection between slavery, to indicate or implicate slavery as a part of modern problems, right? So they don't want you to you can talk about slavery and then quit, and then talk about the current thing and then stop, but do not put them together. But there's no way to even talk about our campus without talking about the systemic ways that these things exist. And so we don't know right now what that means for us, not just for my center, which I'm sure they're trying to figure out how to get rid of imminently, but for our campus and how we talk about ourselves and how our students talk about themselves. But we're also going to be getting students from K through 12 schools who aren't allowed to learn this stuff. And so then when they come to us, it'll be the first time they have ever heard some of this history.
all of you are in southern states,
Yes.
right? We got
the majority
Texas,
of black colleges are in southern
are
states.
also in
There's like
southern
4 or
states.
5 that aren't there. Yes.
So we're in Texas, North Carolina,
Florida.
and down in Florida, right? And all of you,
the only place that looks worse than Texas right now.
they're working hard to one up one another right now.
But they're winning right now.
And so, in the places where you're located, you inhabit these roles as HBCU
Right.
alumni, as faculty members, but you're also administrators, all of you, director of centers, director of major programs. How are you seeing this play out as an administrator as well?
Well, I was going to come back to a point that you made in terms of what does it mean? It means that the war is on.
Yeah.
Literally, the war is on. In real time, we have a very good colleague who's at Florida A&M right now, who is reeling from the changes that are taking place. But in any good war, you need strong leadership.
Yeah.
And when you look at Prairie View A&M, it's really unfortunate that Ruth Simmons is no longer there because she is a general. I look at my institution, North Carolina A&T, and the heat is on, and we're not Texas and we're not Florida, but we're right behind. we are on the cusp. We're one governor away from being these states. But thankfully, our leadership, Dr. Harold Martin, Dr. Tanya Smith-Jackson, who is our vice provost, they have stood shoulder to shoulder and said, look, we are going to do what A&T has always done. On February 1st, 1960, this institution launched the sit-ins. Right? This institution launched movements that transformed and changed this country due to the power of the humanities and social sciences, which caused students to dream and think bigger. So that's something that we're not going to run away from. Just 2-3 weeks ago, we had on our campus William Sandy Darity and Kirsten Mullen, who are authors of the incredible book From Here to Equality. We had a conversation on reparations on A&T's campus. Right, which was paired with Adam Smith, whose book was adopted as our community and textbook, his incredible book, if you haven't read it, The State Must Provide, which talks about this legacy of underfunding HBCUs. And so when you have leadership that's courageous enough to say that we're going to stand on our historical mission, that we're not going to flinch in the face of white supremacy and hostility and attempts to intimidate, which is clearly what we're seeing taking place in Florida and Texas and all over the Deep South and across the country, really.
Across the country.
Right? I mean, it's critically important to have leadership that understands that it's important to use our voices, use our spaces, as we historically have done, to challenge these concepts and to deconstruct white supremacy wherever we find it.
And not to big them up too much, but I run a summer faculty workshop every year. And Jelani's book and Jarvis Gibbons' Fugitive Pedagogy have become instrumental in the work that we do in reminding our faculty that nobody ever approved the kinds of curriculum that we gave our students. The state was always opposed to everything. This second curriculum, it's the second curriculum because the state mandated a different one, right? And so as we think about what we do now, we have to continue to do the things that we have always done and understand that it's only been African American Studies is 50 years old.
Right.
So it's only been relatively recently that the Academy has embraced the kinds of things that we're talking about. And so what we have to do is we have to remember the fugitive pedagogy. We have to remember the second curriculum. And that means that we're going to have to sort of meet the requirements that the state offers us without embracing them. So for instance, we have to teach Texas politics. I don't know if other states, and Texas history. If you major in politics, you take in Texas politics. If you major in history, you're taking Texas history. And so some of the faculty who have taken my workshop, they've taken the Texas politics class and they've imbued it all the way through with what was happening with black people in Texas. It ain't in the curriculum. There's an open source textbook that does not include.
Right.
And so that's the kind of work that we have to do, and we have to remind ourselves that this is the work that we have been prepared for.
And very quickly, that's what, as you mentioned, that's what HBCUs have always done, right? And so there's a quick story in my book about Solomon Say, who was a leading activist minister in the state of Alabama. Dr. King said that before he got to Montgomery, it was Solomon Say who was leading these challenges. Solomon Say was a student at Alabama State University, HBCU, located in Montgomery. And in his memoirs, he talked about taking a class at Alabama State called Human Geography. Now again, that doesn't scream Black Lives Matter. It doesn't scream radicalism. But he says it was that class that put him on a path toward all the work that he had done. Now you got to ask yourself, what was going on in that class, right? These interstitial spaces, these spaces within spaces that Black educators have propped up, have created, have advanced within HBCUs, have been critical in challenging and countering white supremacy. And now more than ever, we need those spaces to exist.
I wanted to say one thing.
Wait, I wanted Dave to get a chance to jump in.
I know he works in Florida, so I got hired as 2020 to turn the program into the department. I've hired 5 new faculty in the last 3 years. About 4 of them went to HBCUs, another 4 are part of the Divine Nine, the Black Greek-led organization. So obviously bringing that perspective into the program. So mentoring, learning how the second curriculum, so still getting the work done in spite of SB 999. So we brought in Dr. Marla Frederick from Emory, who did a talk on critical race theory and Christianity, not a problem, right? We had a speaker last year from the law school that did critical race theory, so we're still doing the work, and you learn how to navigate, just like HBCUs, particularly public HBCUs during the civil rights movement, where presidents had to work within a movement and then you play in the same game. So I had a faculty member the other day, a right-wing news media reached out to me about her course, Black Terror, White Horror. She looks at like Nope and Jordan Peele fields in African-American literature. And she said, well, we might want to change the title for the fall semester, but she's still teaching the same course. See, that's the game. That's how this thing works. So it's the same course, the same books, and everything else. And also, I didn't respond to that reporter because the right-wing hag.
Right.
So you're not going to win that debate. So learning, being an HBCU graduate, knowing this history, you learn how to navigate in these southern states.
So the tactics that all of you have been lifting up, as we think about what's happening in the humanities and social sciences, this pushback is not just happening at HBCUs, it's not just happening in the South. If you think about the strategies that HBCUs have been able to mobilize in order to push back the kind of progressive backlash or blacklash, depending on how you see it, how can HBCUs serve as a model, right? Thinking about our learned societies and the way that they're grappling with the fact that what do we do as all of these laws and policies come up? How can we look to HBCUs as a model to prevent us from repeating the destabilizing and deconstructive forces that we saw under Reconstruction and other areas of progressive Black backlash?
I think one of the differences is, I don't know if this mic is on, but I think one of the differences is that HBCUs, especially publicly funded ones, never see the state as a generous benefactor. We are wards of the state at best. And that means that we have a very sort of critical relationship with them. And so when the governor decided that he was going to end all diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in the state, which means all universities as well, one of the things I was looking for was for, not Texas A&M, I was looking for University of Texas to say no, and they didn't. They paused it all immediately. And one of the things that has to be true is that we have been fighting for a long time, but we can't be the only fighters.
Right.
And here's the thing that I have been saying, and only the people in this room can make me not be a liar, and that is, in every field, including all of the STEM fields, you require for your accreditation some kind of ethics and social responsibilities. And I have been saying that these states are going to push to the point where accreditation is going to start to become a problem. And only you can help us with that. And we can only hope that at that moment they'll start to pull back, because they're not going to pull back because Prairie View complains, because Prairie View, it's our job to complain. We have been complaining since 1876. But if University of Texas, which is the most progressive public partner in the state, is saying, what we're going to do is we're going to pause all diversity and inclusion, I was sitting there like, well, damn. What am I supposed to do? Right? And so we need the larger, more powerful institutions to be the ones where you have less risk, by the way, where University of Texas has an endowment as big as Ivy Leagues. That means that when your people, you can pay your people with your own money that you don't need from the state. We don't have money to pay people through private money. So that means if I stand up and say these same things, I'm fully expecting at some point I'm going to be asked to leave my job if I keep talking, right? That isn't necessarily true at a place like University of Texas. And so we need people who are in less fragile positions to be bolder.
To be collaborators.
To be
and
collaborators.
co-conspirators.
To talk to us about how we've been doing this and maybe figure out how you can do it yourself in an environment where you're less fragile. Where me leaving Prairie View ain't the same as you leaving University of Texas.
Right.
You leave the University of Texas, people are going to see that pedigree as something else. Me, I'm going to have to figure out if another black college potentially can, not me, but people, I'm going to go where I want to go because I believe that. But also, we have to believe that people are going to take us. It's not the same. It's not the same, and we need you to be bolder, and we need these societies to say stop.
So thinking about the folks in the room right now, I'd like to ask all three of you, and I'm going to give you the question, then I'm going to get y'all ready for some Q&A, right? What are 3 areas of investment that you would like to see happen with these collaborators, these partners, these co-conspirators, right? Who are in less fragile positions or who have the ability to do some norm setting and some pushback. What do you want to see happen?
I'll just give you one.
Okay.
I need you to hire staff to help us. Because whatever you imagine, like whatever other schools you work with and the staff in their Office of Sponsor programs and the staff in their research office and the staff in their we have a fraction of that. We have 3 people doing, if I could tell you how many jobs I've taken in the last 4 years, so we have 3 people doing the job of 10 people everywhere. Which means if you turn something over to us and expect that our Office of Sponsor programs or our research office is going to do it or our development office is going to do it, I'm telling you right now they don't have the staff. Okay. And so what we need is for you to actually allocate staffing funding on your end to help us build the thing you want us to see. The thing I've learned most from Ruth is that when she talks to 2 people who want to be in partnership with us, she explains how you don't just have to give us the partnership, you have to help us build the infrastructure that allows us to take on the partnership, otherwise it's doomed to fail.
Jelani and Dave?
Yeah. First I would say this, is that, again, and I led off my comments with this, is that we have to recognize that throughout this room we have academic fields present that were responsible for much of the deficit that HBCUs have been belabored with. Right? Again, this is deliberate underfunding. Right? This is intentional underfunding. It was produced by racist ideas that were propped up by the academy about why we should not fund HBCUs or black education or black schools in the same way. And we had movements that emerged out of that, right? Legal movements to challenge Jim Crow and segregation. So acknowledging that is the first step, right? The complicity within this underfunding. But then recognizing that there are opportunities for partnership. There are opportunities to pour in and invest. I'm the director of a Center of Excellence for Social Justice. There are a number of key agenda items that we're beginning to launch at an institution which is the largest HBCU in the country right now. That's a very fruitful proposition for a number of different academic fields, for a number of different institutions who may want to partner, who are doing similar things on their campus. So I think that recognizing the complicity in creating these oppressive systems and then being intentional of saying, hey, we want to partner with HBCUs. I think we brought up the idea on a conversation the other day about matching endowments, right, or endowed chairs. If you create an endowed chair at your institution, why not also invest in helping to create an endowed chair at a HBCU, which has never had the financial resources to do that, right? So I think that's an important step.
I think also like developing deep networks of HBCU faculty. So think when opportunities come up, who your closest, the 3 people you're going to think of probably look like you. Let's just be honest, right? How to develop these networks, HBCU faculty, bringing them to your conferences, invite them to give talks, you know, any type of ways to put them in your professional networks, because we have it's a 2-tier system. You know, when you see HBCU presidents, most of them serve at HBCUs, same with provosts, right? When you look at, we want black faculty in the STEM, but most white schools don't reach down to HBCUs and take these faculty because they don't have enough publication. So we got to find ways to develop deep HBCU networks with faculty at your organization, bringing them to your conferences, giving lectures, then finding some way to get funding for research time in the summertime. I think that's a way in terms of, you know, making up for the relative deficit for all these years.
Thank you all for that. I want to open it up to the audience for questions, and I know we have some mic runners. I first saw a hand right here. A mic is coming to you. Just a moment. Up here? Right here. Oh, these lights.
Thank you very much, all of you, for this. I'm Tabitha Ewing from the Society for French Historical Studies.
I don't think, is that mic on?
Somebody over there said they could. There, okay.
Try again.
How's that?
There we go.
So thank you again, everybody. I'm Tabitha Ewing from the Society for French Historical Studies, but I'm actually speaking right now as a faculty member at Bard College. Bard has a long tradition of working with scholars at risk, and I'm really deeply ashamed to say that we are right now in Florida working with folks at New College because in a secret meeting with the president, there were 3 faculty members who were told and then indicated that that would never be said again publicly, that they would not receive tenure because of the nature of the work that they're doing. So I just want to reach out to colleagues in the room as well and second what you're saying. You know, Bard's not a super wealthy institution. It's a small liberal arts college in New York State that has some nice friends. And, but the work is being done to reach out to our colleagues who are at risk and to see them in the way that we would scholars in Kyrgyzstan or in some other international place, but to really work on that and see our partnerships as something that's possible. Even if you don't have a ton of money, you can reach out and actually support people, and we will. So that's the first thing. The second thing is just a really, really, really deep, sincere thank you and a query. I went to Princeton with Eddie Glaude, and he's not the only scholar that I've met that I felt like, and that's made me feel as though if I could have at the top of my list when I'm hiring students who went to HBCUs as undergraduates, the way we look for Mellon Mays scholars or the way we formerly look for Ford scholars and things like that, at the top of the list, because these are the folks who have themselves that, that sense of hope that they bring to the classroom, extraordinary discipline, and powerful intellects. That would be my top choice every single time. So I wonder if there isn't a way to make it very easy for people to reach out when they're hiring and find folks, because it's not like it's graduate programs for the most part, in the humanities at least. These are undergraduates. So how do we find those undergraduates and raise them up to the top of our list for hiring practices?
You don't have to look far, as we mentioned, as Dave mentioned as well. So many HBCUs have these pipelines into graduates to grad schools. So we send our students to grad schools. So there's probably a good chance that the folks who are coming across your desk, many of them probably already have a HBCU on their CV as somewhere where they attended. That's a strong.
Recognize the names, though.
Yeah, you have to be able to recognize the names, absolutely. But again, there's a legacy there of black colleges fueling and sending students into these spaces. I will also mention, shout out to your colleague, Jonathan Becker, because we actually are working with Bard College. Bard College has recognized the fact that we want to have a class, a joint course that we're going to be taught, it's going to be taught between Bard College, A&T, Prairie View, and Tuskegee. So that having people in that position
Right.
who say, look, you know, there's a legacy of voter suppression on all of our campuses. Let's come together. We got a $400,000 grant from the Mellon Foundation and the Andrew Gutman Foundation. So being conscious in that way and saying there are ways that we can come together, share resources, because we were chuckling. I think Bard College is flush with resources compared to A&T.
Right?
Compared to, so,
And last night.
yeah, absolutely. So, but no, I mean, Jonathan, I think Becker has done a great job in saying, look, you know, there are opportunities here to work together with HBCUs, and having visionary leadership like that, I think, matters.
Other questions? See one right here in the front. If you can raise your hand so the mic runner knows.
Thank you. I have a question for Melanie. What you described, how you can teach the history of slavery, and you can teach social problems, but you can't put them together. Is that something you can use creatively in a classroom? I mean, the obvious absurdity of that, you know, like what, I imagine the students you don't have to tell somebody something for them to understand it. So is there a way that you have used that creatively in the classroom?
Because why else have tenure if you don't? Which is just, by the way, also on the chopping block for us, where the Texas Senate has passed a law out to undo tenure as well. So there will be no more tenure going forward. It probably won't pass the House, but the point is it made it out of one body. So we talk about it explicitly, and it's not me that I'm really worried about. I'm worried about people who are new, who are assistant professors who are coming in doing their work, right? And more importantly, most of those laws, they apply now to K through 12. So they haven't actually made it up to colleges, but it's things that happen in K through 12. We don't like to believe it, but they impact us. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the remedial work that I told you that we have to do is because of the ways that K through 12 schools fail students of color as well. And so you're already failing them in lots of other ways, and now you aren't teaching them history that is accurate. But I want to to answer your question, I want to talk about a little bit of the urgency of what's happened. So I came back in 2019, and in 2018, 2019, the state of Texas approved through the legislature elective for high school students in African American studies and Mexican American studies. And in 2021, they banned CRT. This is how fast this is happening. Mm-hmm. It's not like when I came to Prairie View, this is not the climate we were living in, right? So I came in 2019, it was not the climate. And so understanding how fast and how rapid these things are happening, and it's a belligerence. And the thing is, I don't know that even your society's pushing back is going to be enough, because they take pride in pushing against the elites that you all represent, Northeastern, no matter where you live. Northeastern elites, they pride themselves in pushing against that. But in our teaching and in our classes, we are making these connections, and the students are making these connections for themselves. It's just the law says that we can't. And in the state of Texas, in all public higher education institutions, we have to do two things every semester. We have to upload our syllabus and our CV. It's public information. So anybody in the state can look up your syllabus every semester and look at what's on it. Doesn't mean they can understand how you're going to teach it, right, but it allows them the ability to come in and say, you're teaching this against the laws of the state, against the education agency. This is the kind of thing I'm trying to explain. And when you are at a place that has a lot of its own money, you can say, well, that part we're funding somewhere else. When you're at a state where all of your money is state appropriations and tuition driven, then they can say, you have violated whatever the rules are. Let's move through the process to revoke their tenure. Let's move through the process to fire this person. Let's move through the process of making them change those classes. That's the kind of vulnerability that I'm talking about. And I worked for a state institution before I came. I was at Rutgers. I didn't even realize I worked for the state for the first year I was there. Because it's not like you call it the State University of New Jersey, and one day I was like, wait a minute, I'm a state employee. In Texas, there's never a doubt. Right. Ever a doubt. Because every semester you have to tell the state what you're teaching. Same in Florida.
That's how they got my colleagues course. They went online, you got to post them every semester. Just go Google it, look it up, then they send you email, get a report or what they call public records request. Right. So they can request records.
And what lots of people are doing is they're just fleeing the state. And what I'm telling you is that everybody can't flee. So we need the people who are not in the state to actually be aware of what's happening and move. Because it's not like Texas stuff doesn't get exported elsewhere. Remember No Child Left Behind? That was a Texas innovation. You're welcome.
So I saw a couple of hands back here. So one here, Sylvia, and then we have one here. So we'll start with Sylvia and then we'll come here.
Good morning.
You're good.
The Executive Director of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Through the course of today, when we talk about Florida, you'll be hearing a lot from me. I would like to just take this moment to say, these are my members, and I am so proud of them. But my question is really more for the audience than for the panel. Is anybody surprised by any of the information? I mean, you don't have to raise your hand for real, but is this striking anyone as, is this really going on? So
I was surprised by it.
okay,
I went to undergraduate at this institution, but undergraduates don't understand what happens in the institutions. So when I came back in 2019, it took months for me to upload my syllabus the first time because I thought, this ain't real. Nobody cares about this. Until I started getting emails from people saying, hey, you are in violation of House Bill 2504, which says you must put this syllabus up. Like, I spend a lot of my time deciding what's real, and then other people like, no, this is a state law coming for. So it's shocking to everyone.
right, and I was going to say that it is really shocking, and it's okay if you know, is this really happening? Yeah. If you're not really engaged in this, you really need to get engaged because it's coming to a campus
Near you.
and a state near you.
Yeah.
And even if you are not in Black studies or minority studies or diversity, and inclusion, which is now I think illegal to say in the state of Florida, that we as these organizations that are responsible, you've heard the panelists say, you've got to really act like this really impacts you because they're coming for us all. And Black people have kind of always been on the front, we've always been out there on the front line. So join us so that we can get ahead of this before it gets even more unbelievable. I want to say crazy, because you say, how could this be? How could this happen? But it's up to us, and we can make a difference if we just band together. And you've heard, you've heard the panelists say, hold up, wait a minute, what are you saying? Because tenure, they're coming after tenure. They're coming after tenure. It's just a matter of time. They don't understand it, they don't like it. You mean they have a job? Like, I could get fired from, Purdue, and they could just let me go. How come they can just keep their job? I'm telling you, there is a level of what's happening out here that we have to understand impacts us all. And the power in this room and rooms like this is the difference between making a change. And we have to be courageous, and we have to understand, as John Lewis said, this is not a battle for today, not for this week, not for this month. This is what we have to do moving forward. These are the people who we have to train to understand that we are warriors in making sure that these disciplines that we have, but this nation can once again hold its head up high and really be an example for others to see that you can do more with less. We have every example that we need, but we've got to support it. And as you've said, HBCUs need your help. And I'm so glad, Melanie, that you said, please hire a staff at your institution that comes over and helps at HBCUs. Small organizations, and some of us here, we know how great would it be if someone could hire a staff person over there that doesn't have to deal with our board, that can just give the information to us so that we can move forward with it.
Thank you so much, Sylvia.
I'm so sorry. I'm giving you that.
We have 2 questions, one here and one here. So I know, Mackenzie, you're there. And we're going to take both of these questions and let the panelists answer. So I keep my job by making sure I stay on time. So one here first.
Okay.
We're just going to take the question.
Tucker from the Middle East Studies Association, and I just want to thank the panelists first and foremost for, yes, it was very revelatory, and it's not that one hasn't heard bits and pieces, but to put it all together and to realize the gravity of it, as Sylvia suggested, it was really, I think, so important for all of us in this room. And I'm from a field where we've had our own issues, perhaps, with interference about what we teach and how we teach it. So, all solidarity. But what I wanted to ask you specifically was, I've read impressionistically sort of narratives about Black students choosing in greater numbers to go to HBCUs in recent years, in the present moment we're in. And I just wanted to ask you if, I haven't really seen concrete studies or anything, but if you feel this is a reality, if you're seeing upticks in your applications if, in fact, more and more students who have options are choosing HBCUs instead of other institutions?
And before you answer that question, let's take this question here first.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much. Virginia Dominguez again, representing the American Anthropological Association. I have a rather delicate question. I think a number of universities, maybe research universities, I'm at Illinois, as I think you know, tend to have historically black colleges as universities as partners, but sometimes as, I don't know, study abroad partners. They think they're very clever. The reason I think this is delicate is because if I were at an HBCU, I would probably, I don't know, I think it's difficult. I think it's a bit of paternalism. You guys have talked about partnership, but I don't think they think of these as partners. I think they think of these as examples of their goodwill. So I wonder what you think.
Goodwill, but since 2020, I can't tell you the number of people who have approached me about being on grants with them, because now funders have offered support. They like these grants with HBCUs on them. But oftentimes what that means is, I meant to say this earlier, that you should really explore the nature of these relationships where people have HBCs on them. Because what that means is we're just going to kick them a little coins, but they're not going to get the bulk of the money or the bulk of the credit or the first name in the authorships, right? And so, you know, I've actually turned down some stuff where I'm like, now this is not something that is important to us right now, but I see why it would look good for you to have us on this grant. Also, thinking about ways in which HBCUs can be the lead principal investigator on grants also becomes, I think, important.
I want to come back to this question over here, is that this is what we know, is that HBCUs historically have always been shelters in a time of storm. And that storm is absolutely intensifying right now. Yes, without question, our enrollment is going, A&T is the largest HBCU in the nation. Prairie View is right behind us. Morehouse College, their enrollment is exploding at the seams right now. And students are telling admissions officers and other folks that one of the main reasons why they don't want to be at a UT Austin, they don't want to be at a UCLA right now, is that they feel these hostile winds blowing. Okay, some of those students enrolling are transfer students from PWIs who've attended there, who no longer want to be there because, again, they don't feel as though their humanity is seen on campus. They have to deal with a variety of different hostile, racist acts that take place across campus, and so they're coming home to HBCUs, and I think it's important to recognize that, but I think it's also important to acknowledge the fact that HBCU, we only make up, I think it's 3%, you said 10%, I think we only make up 3% of the institutions of higher learning in this country. We can't educate all African American students. It's just impossible. We clearly do not have the infrastructure or the space or the personnel to make that happen. So again, I think it's important that PWIs take into account the type of environments that they're creating, the hostilities and racism and patriarchy that is very much embedded within these institutions. And you all need to come up with solutions about how you can deconstruct that on your own. And perhaps looking at the HBCU model can be a way to acknowledge that.
You know what's really interesting? So I would love to have you continue, Melanie. But we are at 11:30, and I know we could continue this conversation ad nauseum. And so Eileen, Jelani, Melanie, Dave, thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you to the audience for your robust engagement. And if you are interested in learning more about this HBCU legacy and future, I'm going to suggest a book. Jelani Favors, Shelter in a Time of Storm, How Black Colleges Fostered Generations of Leadership and Activism, at a bookstore near you. Thank you again.